theyeshiva.net.
Today's class is dedicated by Fari Borz Sani in loving memory of our father, Rachamim ben Aziz Sani Halevi. May he rest in peace in Gan Eden, and in honor of the Sani family and friends for health, prosperity, and successes. Amen. One of the most important principles in communication, in speaking, and even more in writing, is trying to avoid repetition. As somebody once said about public speaking, he said, stand up, tell him what you're going to tell him, then tell him what you told him, and sit down. If it doesn't fit into those three categories, delete it from your notes. This is true in all communication, even verbal communication. Those of you sitting here know one of the annoying things in listening to a speech, a presentation, a lecture, a class, a sermon, whatever it may be, is when the person keeps on repeating himself or herself. We got the point. You said it. You said it twice. You said it 3 times. We're not dumb. We have absorbed it. There's no need to repeat yourself a second time, and never mind more than twice. If this is true even in verbal communication, how much more so is it true when you pen your thoughts on paper? And here, it truly does not lend itself to repetition. When you're reading an article or a book, and a person keeps on repeating themselves, it's extremely annoying. It's incorrect writing. If it's superfluous, if it's excessive, if it's unnecessary, talk about repeating myself. Superfluous, excessive, and unnecessary, it should be deleted. I guess I should practice what I preach, no? The one possible excuse for repetition is, perhaps, if it's an abstract or complex or difficult topic, and you feel that people perhaps have not absorbed it, you may want to convey it in different words, use different adjectives, give different examples or illustrations, anecdotes or stories, or convey it through a different medium in order to help the student or the listener or the reader absorb it. But even then, one has to be very careful. When am I stretching the limits? When am I overdoing it? And really simply saying words that are unnecessary. This is true with all human communication. It's so much more true when it comes to Torah, especially Torah Shebiksav, the written Torah, the Tanakh, especially the Chamisha Chumshe Torah, which has been written precisely with tremendous conciseness and brevity, to the point that whenever there is an apparent repetition, it creates room for the sages throughout the generations to ask a question. Anomaly. Why does this have to say? I already know it. It seems unnecessary. What is the additional lesson or teaching or piece of information or inspiration that you want to share with me by this repetition? Thus, based on this introduction, it becomes quite astounding when one observes the 2 parshiyos of Vayakel and Pekudei. And let me explain to you what I mean, because when you read it and you think about it, it's pretty astounding, pretty shocking actually. Hashem speaks to Moshe in Parshas Truma, that's in the book of Exodus chapter 25, and he gives him detailed and nuanced instructions to give over to the Jewish people to build him a Mishkan, a sanctuary, what we call a tabernacle. And it's not just a general description, build me a nice home, a beautiful home. It should be magnificent. It should be batamt. It should be delightful. with beautiful colors, with a beautiful energy, create a lovely ambiance. That's not what he says. He gets into the nitty-gritty details and nuances of literally every nook and every cranny, no pun intended, every nail and every peg, every beam and every socket, every curtain and every veil, every piece of tapestry and every type of garment. What, how, what material, what metal, the shape, the design, the size, the weight, the color, the look, the dye, without a single detail being ignored. Both the structure, the exterior structure, and the interior design, as we would call it. The vessels, the pieces of furniture, the items that should be stationed in that home, in that mobile sanctuary we call the Mishkan. And for this, the Torah dedicates almost 2 complete parshas. The entirety of Parshas Truma, and then much of Parshas Tetzaveh. Truma is 96 psukim, Tzav, and from beginning to the end, V'yikchu Truma, first he tells them the types of contributions that will be necessary, all of the 15 different materials that will be necessary as the building blocks, the stuff, the materials from which the sanctuary is going to be built, beginning with gold and silver and copper and turquoise wool and purple wool and scarlet red wool and linen and the goats, the hair of goats, etc. Oil, herbs, spices, etc., etc. And then he goes through literally vessel by vessel, item by item, piece of furniture by piece of furniture, and then goes through the outer structure in all of its details, and then we'd learn about the exact garments that had to be made for those who will serve in the sanctuary. And again, not general terms, a shirt, a pair of pants, a hat, a belt, the type of material, the types of strands, how it's made, and all of its details, Parshas Truma and then Parshas Tetzaveh. Truma, I said 96 psukim, Tetzaveh 101 psukim. Kuf Aleph. Parshas Kisisa, God repeats again to Moshe, here in a more general way. He chooses the craftsman to be in charge of the work, a man named Betzalel, a man named Ahaliyav. They are the 2 leaders of the project. And again, he goes through a list of everything that's needed. The sanctuary itself, the ark, the candelabra, the table, 1 altar, a 2nd altar, these vessels, that vessels, these garments. And then Kisisa goes off on a whole other story, the creation of the golden calf. This is all the divine communication to Moshe. Comes Parshas Vayakel, and now begins implementation. Moshe gathers all the Jewish people, and he says, let me tell you what Hashem told me. What the Torah, I would think, could have done here, according to its pattern of brevity, its insistence on brevity, to an extreme. For example, Shabbos. Shabbos, which is every week occurrence. He says, don't do work on Shabbos. What type of work shouldn't you do on Shabbos? Torah says one thing, don't light a fire. The sages deduced from the nuanced ways and the juxtaposition of the verses that there are 39 categories of labor forbidden on Shabbos. They're not even specified in Chumash. That's how much brevity there is in Chumash. And the same is true with hundreds of other laws that are all contained and compressed in one verse, in one sentence, and a half a sentence, with the methodology and the traditions of how to deduce the details. Vayakel, we already had 2 full portions of telling me everything. If you were writing it, you might have said, how do you write in the most briefest way? Moshe gathered the Jewish people. He said, let me tell you what God commanded me. And he repeated to them what God commanded them. And they did it. And in 2 verses, you spared yourself 2 parshiyas, Vayakel and Pekudei, very long parshiyas. Vayakel is 122 verses. Pekudei is, so most chamashim are missing a simon, a mnemonic at the end. I think 92 verses, 122, 92 verses. 122 and 92 is how much? 212, thank you. 212 psukim, which is an astronomical amount of verses. Completely, from beginning to end, almost completely repetition, vart and vart, word and word. To the point that Rashi, in the beginning of the Parshas Pekudei, says, I got nothing to write here. You want to understand what it says? Go back to Truma Tetzava. I already told you everything. Because it's just a repetition. Rashi's not going to start explaining the details of the garments and the vessels and the pieces of furniture. He did it all in Truma when God commanded it. So Rashi says, I already explained everything that there is to explain in these two portions back in Truma Tetzava where the commandment was given. You could just refer back. And that's why these parshas have such few Rashis. Only those details that he didn't explain earlier, or those new details that I mentioned here about the implementation. This is what could have been. What happens in reality? The entire thing gets repeated. Moshe calls the Jewish people. He doesn't say, let me tell you what God told me, and he tells it to them. He actually goes through and he repeats everything Hashem told him. I want you to build this and make this and do this and weave this and create this. After he says it, the Torah now says, not that they did it, now in detail, how everybody contributed. And now the Torah goes through everything as they actually did it, and simply repeats what God told them to do, how they did it. And goes through verse by verse how they do everything. Every piece of furniture, every part of the structure of the Mishkan, till the end of Vayakal, Parshas Pekudei. Moshe now gives an account of where all the money was used, the gold and the silver, what it was used for. And then, again, repetition. We go through all the garments, and it repeats everything Hashem told Moshe to do of how they actually did it. Go through all the garments, tens and tens of verses, until they finish the work. And then the Torah could have just said, they finished the work and they put it up. No, now it says they brought everything to Moshe, and again we have to have a list of what they brought, and we go through everything again. We thought we're done. Now Hashem speaks to Moshe again and says, I want you to put up the Mishkan. We already know what the Mishkan is. You told it to us around 4 or 5 times. He goes through the whole list again. Now, it could have said Moshe put it up. No. Now the whole list goes through again what he put up. And finally, when it finishes with him putting up everything, it finishes, the Torah concludes, Shmois Pekudei, that the cloud covered the Mishkan and the glory of God rested there on the tabernacle and the sanctuary. If you examine these verses and these parshas, many things are repeated not twice. Some of them 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, 6 times. And as a result of that, we have 212 psukim, almost completely, at first glance, superfluous. One verse the Torah doesn't write extra. The Gemara even says an extra word you won't find in Chumash. Forget a word, a letter. If there's an extra vav, an extra hey, why? What is it coming to teach me? A letter. Never mind a word, never mind a sentence, never mind a verse, never mind a parsha. And there you have 2 complete parshas, hundreds of psukim, which seem completely excessive, completely superfluous, literally adding nothing to the story. The story would have been completely understood. Nothing would have been missing. Just say he gathered them. He told them what Hashem said. You could describe how they brought everything in abundance. And they started to do the work. Everything he told them, they did. And then you could describe at the end, Hashem said, now put it all up. And he put it all up. The truth is that when we reflect on this, we have one of the most fundamental teachings of Yiddishkeit being expressed in this repetition. Let's think about the Mishkan of Truma Tetzava and the Mishkan of Hayakal Pekudei. They seem to be reflections of each other, mirroring each other. One is the commandment, one is the execution. One is the Rabbi Shalom telling Moshe what to do. The second is Moshe getting it done on the ground. That's the case, that's the truth. But let's think about it. The Mishkan of Truma Tetzava, in many ways, is a different type of Mishkan. What type of Mishkan is Truma and Tetzava? It's the Mishkan that Hashem is telling Moshe to build. Where? On top of the mountain. What is this Mishkan made up of? God's words. God is speaking to Moshe and telling him on top of Har Sinai to build this Mishkan. He's giving him the instructions how to build it. These instructions are divine words. So what is the material that this Mishkan is made up of? Divine energy. Where? On top of a mountain. Who is the architect? Who is the builder? The divine creator, who's describing to Moshe the plans. Where? On Mount Sinai. What material is he using to build it? His words. Who is he speaking to? Moshe. This is a Mishkan built through divine words, divine energy, on top of a mountain, in the presence of Moshe himself. That's the Mishkan of Truma Tetzava. Then Moshe comes down, and he communicates it to the Jewish people. Now they build a Mishkan. Where are they building it? On earth, not on the top of a mountain. Who's building it? The artisans, the craftsmen. By whose donations? Everybody, men, women, children. It says the women came before the men. It says in Medrash even the children gave contributions. What material? This wasn't words anymore. Gold, silver, copper, wool, hide, skin, incense, different types of fabrics, different types of lumber, physical material items. That's what they're building it from. That's the stuff that the Mishkan is built from, by people on earth. So even though the Mishkan that they're building is the Mishkan that Hashem told Moshe to build, but the fabric of the two Mishkans are very different fabrics, so to speak. And if we think about this, it's really a reflection of two dimensions in life. And here we come to one more quite astounding detail. Maybe not such a detail. If I would ask you, how many sentences does the Torah dedicate to the construction of the cosmos, of the universe? Not just our planet, the entire world. How many sentences, how much space does the Torah feel it needs to dedicate to describing the creation, the development, the construction of our planet and our world? And the answer to this is, if you open up Bereshis, in the beginning, and you'll take a look and you will see 31 verses. 31 psukim. The 31st verse finishes, Hashem saw everything he did. It was very good. It was evening, it was morning, the 6th day, and then we come to chapter 2 of Genesis, Vayichulu Hashamayim V'aretz V'chol Tzom. Everything is complete. Shabbos comes in. The construction of the world in 6 days, 31 sentences. You give me 31 verses, and I give you the world. How large is the universe? Anybody knows? How large is the universe? The word very actually pales in comparison to the answer. We don't really know an accurate answer. But what we do know through our observations today, and it's most likely to change, and according to many it's even expanding. But we know that we're dealing with an observable universe that is 28 billion light years. Meaning, if you get into a car or a jeep or a spacecraft, theoretically, and you want to travel from one end of the universe to the other end of the universe, it will take you minimum 28 billion light years. A light year is not a regular year. The speed of light travels 186,000 miles per second. Okay, 180, even more, and change. 186,000 miles per second. Traveling in the speed of light means that every second you travel 186,000 miles. Do you know how much you travel in a day? Do you know how much you travel in a year? Do you know how much you travel in 10 years, the speed of light? Do you know how much you travel in 1 million years? Do you know how much you travel in 28 billion light years? And then you will be able to reach the observable end of the universe. 28 billion light years. 31 verses. And I give you the world. Now come with me to the Mishkan. How big was the Mishkan? 100 amas in the length. That's approximately 150 feet. Approximately. 50 amas in the width. Let's say 100 amas this way, 50 amas in the width. Actually, pretty much this tent. Okay, give or take a little bit. Yeah. 50 amas in the width. That's approximately 75 feet. So let's say 150 by 75, again approximately, feet. And it's a mobile sanctuary. It's not a permanent structure, like a tent. Welcome to our tent. Actually, this is even more permanent than the Mishkan was. This is not so easy to dismantle. Sukkah is always a crisis. Make a sukkah, not make a sukkah. 150 feet by 75 feet or so. How many verses does the Torah dedicate to the construction of this mobile sanctuary, 150 by 75? And the answer is, you go through the whole Truma, as I told you, 96 psukim. You go through Tetzava, 101 psukim. You go through Vayakel, 122 psukim. You go through Pekudei, 92 psukim. Part of Kisisa is dedicated to the Mishkan. Part of Tzav is dedicated to the Mishkan. Part of Shmini is dedicated to the construction of the Mishkan. Part of Bamidbar, part of Nosoi, part of Ba'aloischa. You'll do the math, and you hit approximately 600 psukim, close to 700 verses. So we read Chumash, but do we take notes? The universe, minimum 28 billion light years, 31 verses does the job. The Mishkan, 150 feet by 75 feet, a mobile shtibel, a beautiful one, dazzling, brilliant, extraordinary architecture and design, and the work of great artisans, intricate, nuanced. But 150 feet by 75 feet, close to 700 verses. Something strange. What an anomaly. How enigmatic. Reminds me of the anecdote. This fellow buys this beautiful Italian silk, and he gives it to his tailor. Brilliant, great tailor with great reputation, to weave him this most exquisite suit. And the man tells him, I need 3 weeks. After 3 weeks he comes, it's not ready yet. It's hard work. 7 months, it's not ready. 8 months later, he calls him up, the suit is ready. He comes, he tries on the suit, it's very nice. He looks at me, he says, but I don't understand you. 8 months it takes to weave a suit. Even the universe took only 6 days. What takes you 8 months? Taylor says, how do you compare? But in truth, how does one? The question is the other way. How do you compare? And within the Mishkan itself, you see that this is not just, it happened that way. There is so much repetition. It's almost like the Torah wants to make a point of repeating and elaborating and expounding and repeating again. It almost wants to make a point that this must be elaborated upon in great length. Because even if it's dedicating so many psukim, 100 would have already trumped the world by a significant amount. 200, Truma and Tzav itself would have been far longer than the whole story of creation. But then you have Kisisa Vayakel Pekudei, as explained above, how many times and how nuanced the repetition is. The answer to this enigma is very, very simple and very, very profound. And the best way to sum it up in a succinct fashion is this. For an infinite God to create an extraordinary world for finite man is not such a novel thought. After all, if God is infinite, infinity creates big things. In fact, even 28 billion light years don't really reflect even a fraction of infinity. Not to underestimate the number, but in the presence of infinity, 28 billion, 1 billion, and $10 are really equal. Getting from 1 to 1 billion doesn't bring you any closer to infinity. So for infinity to create this most grandiose, awesome, spectacular, stupendous world, planet and world, for a finite human being, it's great, it's awesome, it's extraordinary, it's dazzling, it's mind-staggering, but it's not such a novelty. After all, it's an infinite God. But for a finite human being to be able to create a home for an infinite God, that's a revolutionary idea. That's a revolutionary thought. That's the revolutionary idea of Judaism, of Yiddishkeit. So the creation of the world is awesome and we're very appreciative for it. And the wisdom within a single cell, and the body has 40 trillion cells, is infinite. It's a reflection of an infinite God. And as I told you, it's not even a reflection of infinity. It's just a reflection of something that's extraordinary, large, profound, and brilliant. 31 verses does the job. Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim es haaretz, and the description that continues for the next 6 days until Shabbos. What is truly revolutionary is that a physical, finite, limited, mortal human being with a frail heart, with insecurities, with fear, a person of flesh and blood, as we say, Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, Adam Yisoidim Eyofer V'Soifer Le'Ofer. Somebody comes from the earth, returns to the earth. Chitzitz Noivel, Cha'avak Poireach, V'Chachaloim Yof. Sometimes feels like withering grass, like floating dust, like a fleeting dream. A person who sometimes looks in the mirror and feels weak, mortified, despondent, dejected. A person who has mood swings. 1 hour I'm on top of the world, the next hour I feel like I'm in the abyss. 1 hour I have certainty, the next hour I don't know if I'm coming or I'm going. A fragmented, dichotomized spirit who could sometimes be very idealistic and sometimes completely self-absorbed and clueless and ignorant. That human being can carve his or her heart, his or her space, his or her mind, his or her life, his or her home, into an abode for the infinity, into an abode for ultimate truth. That's a revolutionary idea. Shlomo HaMelech, when he builds the first Beis HaMikdash, he says a few words, and he conveys this most eloquently in the book of Melachim Aleph, the Chanukas of the dedication of the Beis HaMikdash. He says, I quote, King Solomon, Hashamayim u'shmei Hashamayim lo yichal kalucha afki habayis hazeh. The heavens and the heavens of heavens. Meaning not only the heavens above the heavens, as far up as you go, physically and spiritually, they can't contain you. Lo yichal kulucha, they can't contain infinity. Afki habayis hazeh, this home built of mortar, built of stone, built of rocks, built by physical hands, by flawed people, this will contain you? Afki habayis hazeh. Shlomo HaMelech is astounded by the idea. This heart, this little, frail, mortal heart that is so moody and has so many issues, this person who's filled with perhaps trauma and pain and toxicity, and even the most perfect person, is still frail and mortal and temporary and transient and weak and so limited. And yet, the Rebbeinu Shalom says, "Va'asu limikdash v'shachanti b'soicham." And as the Alshich and the Reishis Chachma and the Shalosh say, it should have said b'soichai, I will dwell in it, not in them. It's one home, it's not many homes. Because you'll build a home and I will dwell in them, in their hearts, in their souls, in their minds, in their bodies. My body, my physical guf can become the Keli, the Mishkan, the Mikdash, where God himself says in his essence, this is where I want to live. This is where I want to dwell. This revolution deserves hundreds and hundreds of verses. This is a completely novel. This is an extraordinary thought. And yet within this itself, there are two phases. There is the Mishkan of Truma and Tetzaveh, and then there's the repetition of the Mishkan of Ayakal and Pekudei. And what's the difference between the two? Let's illustrate this with another example. Many of us don't have one life. We have two lives. And what I mean by two lives is, I don't mean double lives. But I mean, many of us, not all, but many of us have two lives. There is the life that one dreams of. And then there is the life of one's reality. Sometimes the two are synchronized perfectly. And if you have that, we would love to get the lessons. But at least often, or not, I should say, not infrequently, the two are not always seamless. And it's true about every aspect in life. Not everybody has one marriage. Many people have two marriages. And what I mean by two marriages, it is not necessarily they got married twice or three times. But I mean, even if they're married once, there's often more than one marriage. There's the marriage you dreamt of, and there's the marriage of your reality. Many people don't have 5 children or 10 children. They have 20 children, 30 children, 40 children. And I don't mean physically, but they are the children you dreamt of, the nachas you imagined, and then there's the reality of what you're dealing with. Many people don't have one career, many careers. Now again, I'm not talking about people who are changing careers. You may have the same career for 30 years. But there is the career, there's the vocation you dreamt of, you planned, and then there's the career, there's the vocation of your reality. And this is true in so many areas of life. Sometimes when you're young and idealistic, and you imagine what your life is going to look like. You remember? When you were 16, 17, maybe when you were even 8 or 9. Some dream, great dreams for themselves. What type of person I want to be. What type of family I want to have. What type of marriage I want to experience. What type of children I want to have. Who I want to be. When we're 4 and 5 and 6, running around uninhibitedly and freely without a concern in the world, and we dream about things. Some people at the age of 6 have dreamt to be the President of the United States of America. Not that it's such an honorable position always. And you grow as a teenager, and you dream. Sometimes we compare our lives to the lives of other people we know, and we promise ourselves, it's not going to be the same. I'm going to do it much different. I'm going to do it in a different way. It's going to be much better. As you enter into courtship, whatever form of courtship exists in your life and in your community, there are the great dreams, the great chaloimos, the great visions that we have for what our home will look like, what our relationships will look like, what our marriages will look like. And then when God blesses you with children, and those little cute angels crawl in with you in bed, want you to be with them in bed, read them stories, give them baths, play games with them, throw them balls, make cookies together. When they're young, 1 and then 2 and 3 and 4, etc., and you look at these children and you anticipate and you imagine and you sometimes expect and you dream of what they're going to look like. as adults, and Jews have a very loaded word for this. It's called nachas. Quite a loaded word and a loaded blessing. At every simcha you should have a lot of nachas. And as they say, Yiddish nachas. And the Magidim say, why? Because if you look in Parshas Vayishlach, Esav had a son and his name was Nachas. So you can have Nachas. Esav also had Nachas. The question is, what type of Nachas? And the same is true in so many areas of life. And sometimes it's completely through curveballs that people don't imagine. A couple came to see me a little while ago. They got married. A month after the wedding, her husband was diagnosed with a terminal illness. He's a young woman, fresh, vibrant, vivacious, alive, joy of her life. She found her, as she put it, her groom in shining armor, and this curveball, literally from left field. Sometimes people, as children even, they don't even have a chance to develop their dreams, as they're cut short with tremendous burden, responsibility, sometimes loss, sometimes grief, sometimes other forms of pain, and they're, so to speak, snatched from that playful ability to sit in the sandbox and just look at the sky and watch the snowflakes come down and imagine that you're one of them. Some of us have the luxury to stay in that sandbox for many, many years. And that's an awesome gift and blessing. Some people never leave the sandbox. Sometimes people are schlepped out of that playful, conceptual, metaphorical sandbox way too early. And they have to contend with harsh realities, sometimes without the proper tools to be able even to process them. But very often at different stages in life, dreams get shattered, expectations destroyed. You wake up in the morning and you take a look at your life and you're like, where did all the dreams disappear to? Sometimes a person is looking at the marriage that they imagine, and the marriage of their reality is a completely different marriage. The child you imagined and the child that you're dealing with as a teenager or as a young adult, a young man, a young woman, a completely different child. Who went wrong? Where did I go wrong? Was it my mistake? Was it somebody else's mistake? Who do I blame? Is there nobody to blame? Is this a game of dice? Is there fate? Is there destiny? Is there purpose? Sometimes people build up to something, and then it turns out that it's what do they call it? A house of cards. What do they call it? Like the edifices you build on the beach, you know, those edifices, and then the water comes, the castles that the children build on the beach, remember? And then the water comes, an ice castle. But so many lives are part of this experience, where I imagine one type of home, one type of journey, and then I have the actual reality. How do we deal with this tension? How do we deal with this dissonance? How do we deal with these disappointments, with these frustrations, with these dichotomies and contrast and paradox? They're not easy. They often create cognitive dissonance, as the psychologists call it. It's a phrase from the 1950s. Cognitive dissonance. There's so much dissonance. It can happen individually. It can happen collectively. Sometimes we deny. We have no choice. It's too painful to face the shattering of the dream. I deny. I have to deny. I have to repress my authentic feelings, my emotions, my responses. I have to cover it up. Sometimes for myself, and sometimes not for myself, but at least for other people. I have to be all smiles all the time to be able to give off the impression that in my case, the dream and the reality match perfectly. Maybe it's necessary for shidduchim. Maybe it's necessary for my standing in my community. Nobody should know that in my family there are cracks, there are holes, there are imperfections, there are flaws. And sometimes if I do it long enough, I start believing my own stories, right? You know what they say about certain people. He's a real liar in the sense he doesn't even know he's lying. He makes up the stories and he believes his own stories. If you work hard enough on yourself, you start believing your own stories. You believe your own propaganda. It's complete propaganda. And you start believing it. There are people that way. They sell you propaganda. You look at them. You don't know if you're dreaming, if they're dreaming, if they're Meshiga. And then you realize it's not malicious. They mamish believe their own propaganda. It's a fascinating thing. I always marvel at it. I start laughing. I had somebody in my house a little while ago, and he's telling me about relationships. He was pure propaganda. Whatever the details are, completely irrelevant. And first I wanted to say, like, you're dreaming, buddy. And then I realized, no, he mamish believes it. You tell yourself something for so long, and the emotional compulsion to do it is so profound that your psyche has no choice but to turn it into a reality. And if you could stay that way till the end of your life, I don't know, maybe it's a good option, right? There's a book called A Boy Named It. You ever saw A Boy Named It? It's quite a story. So, I don't know, some people say today it's not so true. It's hard to believe that these things still happen, but, but things do happen. So, at some point he comes to visit his mother, who, according to the book, has abused him beyond. And she's a complete alcoholic. I think she's still alive. Complete alcoholic, completely drunk. And he looks at her and he sees there's no person there. Her brain is fried. This is a person that almost destroyed his life in horrible ways. I mean, she was quite sick, it seems like. A boy named It. And at the end, he looks at her and he says, I looked at my mom and I said, Mom, just continue drinking. That was the only advice he can give his mother. Just continue drinking. Don't wake up. Remain in your slumber. Sometimes the best advice I can give her. But it speaks so much about the ability of the human condition. Plasticity works in different ways. Sometimes plasticity works to expand your neuro consciousness, and sometimes plasticity works to be able to believe everything. So sometimes that's my way of dealing with it. I repress, I cover up, I lie to others, and then sometimes I lie to myself. Deep down, though, a part of my soul is dead. Because whenever I lie to myself, it means I'm not living with truth. And when I'm not living with truth, my truth has to die in order for me to live. And whenever truth has to die in order for a part of you to live, it means even the part that's alive is dead. And that's the meaning of the Gemara in Brachas. Rishayim af b'chayayim kruyim mesim. A person could be alive, but if for me to be alive, my truth has to be dead, then what is really living? Truth must die. So that means even that which is alive is lifeless. On the other hand, the Gemara says, Tzadikim af b'misasam kruyim chayim. Tzadikim, even after their passing, are called alive, because the truth that they lived with remains alive. The famous expression, in Ruchnius is nishtakin avar. In real spirituality, there's no past. If it was really alive, it never dies. If it dies, it was never really alive. Va'atem hadveikim b'Hashem Elokechem chayim kulchem hayayim. Connection with ultimate truth means chayim. You're alive. You're fully alive. I was 2 nights ago at an event, Sunday night at an event. So, Harav Yisrael David Schlesinger, Shlitter, Rabbi Schlesinger here from Monsey spoke. So he said that the last shmuas he heard from his Rosh Yeshiva, Rav Koppelman from Luzern. He had a yeshiva in Luzern. So he said the last shmuas he heard from him, he was speaking to Bachrim in London, yeshiva Bachrim, and he told them, guck nicht heraus vom Fenster. In life, don't look out the window and try to replicate what's outside. Live internally. And he said, weil guckt heraus vom Fenster, zu wissen, was meint gelebt. Because if you look out of the window to be able to see what it means to live, he says, das ist, was meint zu leben, weiß ich nicht, was meint zu sterben. If that's the definition of life, then what is the definition of death? Sometimes you see something, this is the definition of life. If this is the definition of life, then what is the definition of death? So that's one response a person has. And then there's another response that a person has. The opposite. I'm so devastated by the shattering of the dreams. I'm just a broken person. I resign. I become so despondent. I become so sad. I'm full of anxiety and stress, blaming myself or blaming others. It's almost irrelevant, but I'm just in this endless cycle of guilt and shame and brokenness. I become a broken person because so many of those dreams were gone. My first tablets were shattered. My first luchos, my sacred dreams, my ideal vision of what my life will look like, what my home will look like, what my marriage will look like, what my relationships will look like, what my children will look like, what my grandchildren will look like, what my existence will look like, what my environment will look like, what my vocation or career will look like, is completely inconsistent with the reality of the situation. I once saw a very acute description. Some of you remember Watergate, or you read about Watergate. So Richard Nixon resigned before he could be impeached. His Secretary of State was a Jew, a German Jew who's still alive, an elderly Jew whose name is Henry Kissinger. And Henry Kissinger describes the night before President Nixon resigned. Henry Kissinger was a German Jew, and a real German Jew. Came to America as a youngster, brilliant man, excelled well, became Secretary of State, founder of what's known as shuttle diplomacy. And he says it's 2 o'clock in the morning. Approximately, Nixon is leaving the White House, the last night he would serve as the President of the United States of America. And he stops at a portrait of John Kennedy. And he starts speaking to the portrait of President Kennedy, who's been assassinated a decade earlier in 1963. And he starts talking to Kennedy. Now, Kennedy and Nixon were timeless rivals. And he says, John, I have a question. Why do the American people love you, and why do they hate me? Kennedy could do no wrong. The Kennedys could do no wrong. Camelot. And Nixon could do no right. Nixon could not do anything right. He says, John, why do the American people love you? Why are they enamored by you? And why do they despise me? Kissinger writes this. He was watching this. And then Nixon speaks to the dead president, the late president, and he answers. He says, I'll tell you why, President Kennedy. When they look at you, they see what they would like to be. When they look at me, they see what they are. And that's the difference. This is a profound observation. They look at you, they see what they would like to be like. They look at me, they see what they are. They don't like themselves. I am a mirror of who they are. You are a mirror of who they would love to be in their dreams and imagination. The image of Kennedy always remained that image of youthfulness and charm and charisma and vibrancy. And Nixon was a little bit of a different image. Both the way he looked, the way he spoke, the way he carried himself. He was as ausgeschnitten geworden von einer Fabrik, different material. So sometimes you look at somebody and they just reflect, they're a mirror of your fantasies. And somebody else is a mirror of who you are. People don't like who they are. And in parentheses, I should say, this is one of the attractions for people to look in strange places to feel good about themselves. Because if you could be in a relationship with somebody who is a mirror of fantasy land, fantasy island, it works. I'll tell you an interesting statistic that a great, great therapist once told me. He deals a lot with this. Fascinating statistics. Marriages in which couples betray each other and they enter into relationships with other people outside of the marriage. And often it leads to the breakup of the marriage, to a divorce, and to a second marriage with the person they love so much. Only 3% of them stay married. So I asked this therapist, why? What's the reason? And he told me these words, very wise and very profound. He says, because when they were having the affair, it was 3% of him and 3% of her that was connecting. It was only 3% of their lives. Because when they're involved with this other person, they don't have to share with them everything of reality. They're not talking about the kids. They're not talking about the laundry. They're not talking about the bills. They're not talking about day-to-day life. All they're talking about is fantasy island. With your spouse, you're dealing with reality. So they're connecting to each other. Basically, 3% of their life is connecting. And those 3% is heavenly. It's dreamland. Now they get married. Suddenly, the other 97% has to connect. You guys have nothing in common. All your issues are just coming back. Maybe worse, maybe better, maybe the same. But when somebody is drunk and desperate and got to numb the disappointments, then I'll look for anything. When a person is drowning, they'll catch onto a piece of straw as a rafter, as a boat. At least I can hold on to something, even though sie nicht gesteigen, sie nicht geflogen. So to be able, sometimes I look in a mirror and what I see is I see who I am and I don't like the mirror. But if the mirror could not tell me who I am, tell me who I would love to be, who I thought I would be in another Gilgal or 20 years ago, right? The magic mirror that turns me into a completely different person physically or emotionally. These mirrors I love. But when I'm put face to face with my real mirror, I'm like, I don't like this mirror. Arois, out. So what do? I shatter the mirror. That's one way of dealing with it. As the Greeks would say, kill the witness. Kill the mirror. Destroy the mirror. And any mirror that gets close to it, you destroy. And those are the people you make sure not to speak to anymore because they're mirrors. Unless you could give me a mirror that doesn't tell me who I am. It tells me a different story and then I like you. Then I'm good. But there's another way. Instead of breaking the mirror, I break myself. I'm so broken, I'm so disappointed. I know the mirror is true, and therefore, I can't look in the mirror anymore. So what do? Instead of destroying the mirror, I destroy me. And when I destroy me, I don't have to face myself in the mirror either. And this is what we often don't realize, that the path of repression and the path of depression are more similar than we imagine. The path of depression sometimes seems so honest. I'm broken because I'm honest, I'm not lying. But instead of breaking the mirror, I'm just breaking me. But I'm accomplishing the same thing. I'm detaching from life. I can detach from life by lying, and I can detach from life by becoming resigned to a desperate reality. It's also detaching from life. It's also a form of death. I spoke about repression as being a form of death. Depression is also a form of death. Resignation is also a form of death. It's the inability to be able to deal with life. The mirror is too painful. Either the mirror goes or I go. Resignation, cynicism, despair, guilt, shame, toxicity, the negativity that sits on my head because of all of these shattered disappointments. I have failed myself, I have failed God, I have failed my parents, I failed my Zayde Baba, especially if I have yichus. Especially if I have yichus. And they wrote on the invitation, Nin v'neched doir achar doir, to around 29,000 tzaddikim. On the invitation you can only print 4. But by the Sheva Bruchas, they went through almost all the 29,000. And from day 2, my mother and Baba told me what I have on my shoulders to carry, the responsibility. And now I look at my life, I look at my children. I am not a failure. I am a colossal failure. I am a titanic failure, pun intended. I was supposed to be the Titanic. The Titanic coming into New York with fanfare and drama on its maiden cruise. And then when they hit the iceberg, it's all over. So what do I live with? I have to live with this terrible sense of brokenness and shame because I am an honest person. It seems honest, but it's also a form of lifelessness. So you see why the Torah can't just say, Hashem told Moshe to build a Mishkan. He told him how to build it, and he went and built it. No. That's missing the story. Not just missing a detail of the story, it's missing the story. The Mishkan that Hashem told Moshe to build is the ideal Mishkan. A Mishkan built on a mountain, in heaven, made of words. It's a Mishkan built of dreams, of words, of energy, of holiness. It's built by God, speaking to Moshe, who's his servant, his prophet. Those Mishkans are impeccable. They're perfect. They're flawless. It's like when the architect gave you the plans for your home. You remember that? And you looked at the plans, imperfect. An architect could draw perfect plans. That's what we pay him for. Impeccable, flawless. And you look at the plans, wow, what a home. Now get the contractor to do it. Sure. 20 years later, you're still aggravated. First of all, it took him 20 years. You wanted to live there 20 years ago, 20 years later. And of course, this couldn't be done. Oh, I had to adjust. Oh, you wanted a bathroom here? Oh, let's put the bathroom somewhere else. The wires don't fit here, we'll put the wires there. Seldom does it happen that the reality of your home and the plans of your home are synchronized in a seamless flow. And the reason is very simple. When I draw plans, unless I'm a really great architect, I can sometimes cut a corner. On paper it works. Now build me the home, it's a whole different reality. Plans are made with pens and pencils. I can't build my home with a pen and drawing a few lines. Here I need the bricks. I need the mortar. I need the concrete. I need the mess. It's a mess. I got a gut. And the headaches and the burdens. Building a Mishkan on a mountain in words. Turning your home, your life, your world into a divine abode. That's the ideal sanctuary. That's Truma Tetzaveh. It's made up of spiritual stuff. That's what dreams are made up of. What are dreams made up of? What is the fabric, the material your dreams are made up of? It's called neurons. Brain waves. That's what they're made up of. But what is real life made up of? I mean, that's also real in the brain. But then what is physical life made up of? Vayakal Pekudei is a different Mishkan. It's the Mishkan of copper. It's the Mishkan of physical copper, of physical wool, of physical oil, of physical spices, of physical hide of the ram, or the tachash, or the hair of the goats. It's the physical beams and planks and pegs and nails and curtains. It's the physical strands, physical dye, physical fabrics, physical people with sweat, blood, and tears. It's not a Mishkan of words and dreams and energy and spirituality. It's a Mishkan of concreteness, pun intended once again. They say there was once a rabbi who would speak eloquently from the pulpit about the need to love children. One day, they paved his alleyway with fresh pavement, and the children on the block, you know what they do when they see fresh pavement, right? I'm still compelled to do it, I go into a building, it says don't touch, and what does every Jew do? Not every Jew, but some people, those who are still in the sandbox, you have to touch, because they told you not to touch, and we don't tolerate anti-Semitism in America. If they tell a Jew not to touch, it means you should touch. But children are jumping now all over his alleyway and afoot. Of course, children like to leave their imprint on this world, so they're putting in their names and slogans and beautiful messages. And the rabbi comes out, and to his dismay and horror, he sees all of their hakafos dancing on his new pavement, and he loses it. He snaps, and he starts hollering like never before. You're a bunch of ganovim brats, spoiled kids. I will smack you. You are horrible. And his wife, the Rebbetzin, hears her husband shouting, and she comes out, she says, I don't understand you. Every Shabbos you speak about sensitivity to children with such eloquence and compassion. Was schreist du? You completely lost it. You're hollering. He says, listen, I love children in the abstract, not in the concrete. Okay. So there is the home and the love I build in the abstract. And it's amazing, and you need it. That Mishkan is important because it's the reference point. It's the backdrop. The contractor always has to look at the plans, the ideal. But then there's the Vayakal Pekudei, people, physical people, building a physical sanctuary from physical material, and not in heaven, in the wilderness, in a desert, in an unpaved desert, in a barren desert, in an infertile desert. This is where they're building a physical home made of physical material. The words may be the same, but it's a completely different Mishkan. One is heavenly, one is earthly. One is spiritual, one is material. One is built from energy, and one is built from material. One is built by the divine, and the others built by people. And then, at the end of Parshas Pekudei, as the repetition, so to speak, really not a repetition, it's a different Mishkan. In terms of words, it may replicate the first, but it's a different Mishkan. This is a spiritual one. It's a physical one. This is on the mountain. This is on the ground. But I said I shouldn't repeat myself. At the end of it all, Hashem tells Moshe. What does he tell Moshe? He says to Moshe, Be'echad, on the first day of the month of Nisan, I want you to erect this Mishkan. Which Mishkan? He goes through the whole list again. I want you to erect this Mishkan. And Moshe does it, and he erects it. And then the Torah completes it. Pekudei. The cloud covered the tabernacle, and the glory of Hashem filled the Mishkan, and Moshe could not enter into it, because the cloud hovered over it, and again, Kvoid Hashem Molayas HaMishkan, he could not enter into the Mishkan. At the summation of Ayakal Pekudei, the Torah says, in which Mishkan did the Shechina dwell? In which tabernacle did the divine come into? In the one of Truma Tetzaveh, or in the one of Ayakal Pekudei? In the one of Ayakal Pekudei. Truma Tetzaveh were the instructions. It was the manual. It was the preparation. It was just the training grounds for the real Mishkan. Where's the real Mishkan? The real Mishkan is the Mishkan of Ayakal Pekudei. That's where God says, I dwell. That's where you will find my presence. You will not find my presence in the Mishkan of words and dreams and vibrations and energies constructed out of spiritual stuff atop a sacred mountain reaching heaven. You will find my presence, my essence, my intimate presence in the sanctuary built by humans, by donations and contributions of earrings and necklaces and handbands and all of the various jewelries that the Rabbi, that the women brought and the men brought and the children brought, out of the mirrors, the maris hatzoivos, as the pasuk says, the women brought. Rashi says the mirrors that were used by them, and Moshe wanted to reject them. Says Rashi, why did Moshe want to reject them? Says Asuyin li Yetzer Hara. Mirrors are made for the Yetzer Hara. The mirrors were used by the women in Egypt for one purpose. Their husbands were exhausted, and they needed to use the mirrors to be able to promote family life. So Moshe said, I understand, but it has to do with the Yetzer Hara. It has to do with human craving. Where does it come to the Mishkan? He rejected it. Amalei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Rashi says this. Amalei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Elu chavivin alayim min hakoil. The mirrors is the best contribution that anybody brought for the Mishkan. Because these mirrors are the ones who are responsible for Jewish children being born in the purgatory of Egypt. Elu chavivin alayim min hakoil. Moshe himself couldn't fathom that the mirrors are sacred. The mirrors are not sacred. The mirrors are a part of life. But, they belong somewhere else. They belong in your home. They don't belong in the Mishkan as a promote. We're going to start promoting them. Hashem said, Elu chavivin alayim min hakoil. These are the most precious. And what does he use them for? You would think he would use them somewhere as I tuck them in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. The Kohen Gadol could see it. He says, take the mirrors and make them into the kiyur. The kiyur was the first thing you came across. Everybody had to use it every day because you had to wash your hands and your feet from the kiyur in order to go in. It was right in the entrance for everybody to see. They were made of mirrors. Whose mirrors? The women's mirrors. What's the concept of a kiyur? To wash yourself. Wash yourself off from what? From dirt. How are you washing yourself off from dirt? Through those mirrors. This doesn't happen on top of the mountain. On top of the mountain, your Mishkan is not made of mirrors. Your Mishkan is made of spiritual energy. In Vayakal Pekudei, I can't make a Mishkan with spiritual energy. I can't make a Mishkan with dreams. I can make a Mishkan with sweat, with tears, with my body,
with my mirrors, with my jewelry, with my material, with my money, with my gold, with my checkbook, with my cutlery, with my dishes, with my beds, with my furniture. But these all seem inconsequential, broken, fragmented, materialistic. But in the Mishkan of Adar Pekudei, God says, this is where you're going to find me. This is where my home is. It's easy in life to be able to look at your dreams, to be able to look at your ideal Mishkan and say, that's where life is. But the Rabbi Shalom says that's not where life is. Life is where I am. Let me tell you where I am. I am in the reality of your life. I am in your home today. I am in your kitchen today. I am in your relationship today. I am in your children today. I am in your work today. I am in your grandchildren today. It's in the reality of your life, a reality that's made up of very physical things, seemingly very cheap things, not cheap in terms of value of money, but cheap in terms of comparing it with a heavenly Mishkan. It's physical. Physicality by definition is temporary, transient, moody. It's in your heart today. But my heart is filled with mood swings. My heart has ups and downs. My heart fluctuates. You know, my heart is a complicated creature. Doesn't even know who he is. As a herahin. One day it's up on the mountain. One day it's down in the abyss. That's where I am, in that heart. In my reality today, in your mind today, in your soul, in your heart, in your physical existence, your body, your guf today, now contains the Kvod Hashem. V'shachanti b'soicham. B'soicham is not an ideal self that we can fantasize about, which is amazing and it's always good as a backdrop because a person ought to always grow and challenge themselves. To replicate, to build a Mishkan based on the vision of Har Sinai. But the Mishkan is not built there. The Mishkan is built here. If the Torah would have not repeated the Mishkan, we would think the value of the Mishkan down here is only insofar as it reflects the Mishkan up there. The entire value of the Mishkan here is basically a poor, impoverished copy of the Mishkan up there, and the closer it could match to that one, the more value it has. But its entire mission, its entire essence is that it's a copy of that one. Torah says, no, you got it wrong. This is the Mishkan. That is the prerequisite. It's the training. It's the preparation. It's the learning. It's understanding the vision. But this is the Mishkan. This is where it's at. This is where it's happening. This is where the Shekhinah dwells. This is where the divine presence dwells. Have a wonderful week.
It's a very good question. How do you know when to accept and how to say no? That's why we must always have the Mishkan of Truma Tetzava, the ideal world. Because our purpose is to create here a beautiful life, not a broken life, chas v'shalom, right? Emes, our Mishkan is made up of physicality and of fragmented pieces and of disappointments. But our function is to build a Mishkan and a Mikdash that reflects the Truma and Tetzava. And that's exactly the answer. If it's, I want to embrace my reality, but I have to be able to embrace a reality and be able to use it and see it as a catalyst for serving Hashem with simcha. For doing what I have to do in this world, whether it's being a father, a mother, a human being, a Jew. If, however, I'm stuck in a reality that keeps me trapped and there's a way out of it, I have to try to get out of it. So now the question is, at what point do you say, this is too much to bear? This every person has to see in their life the pros and the cons of every situation. For example, somebody's in a marriage. The marriage is very, very difficult. Sometimes the marriage is unbearable. It's abusive, it's dangerous. A person has to go out of it. You don't say, this is the reality, this is where Hashem wants me to be. Maybe Hashem put me and He wants me to run. That's my avodah, that's my shlichus, right? But sometimes running doesn't necessarily solve all the problems.
Sometimes the pros of being in a marriage are much greater than the pros of being out of the marriage. Now, I cannot tell anybody that. They have to know that. In other words, being in the marriage may prove very beneficial in many ways. It may prove also difficult in many ways. Leaving the marriage may prove beneficial in many ways and difficult in many ways. And this is where a responsible mother or father or husband or wife have to really weigh the pros against the cons. Get advice from people they trust, but ultimately they have to know deep, deep down inside what type of life this is going to mean for them. If it's going to be a life of horrific agony and suffering, and maybe even dangerous, and could make them meshuga and drive them mad and destroy them and their children, then the decision has to be one type of decision. And then to say that Hashem wants you to be here is not true. It's ridiculous. It's absurd. Maybe Hashem wants you to run far, far away. On the other hand, a person may say, you know what? Yes, there are challenges being here, but I'm not going to delude myself and run away and suddenly the world is going to become like paradise. Sometimes it's the other way around. And I have to really weigh the pros against the cons and then say, this is the reality that is right for me. This is the Mishkan that I have to build. And this is the Mishkan I'm going to build. It's not perfect, but it's where I'm going to find truth. And that's a very, very deep calculation and cheshbon every person has to make within their own life. So we always want to better our life. This is not about resigning and embracing the negative and the toxic and the dysfunctional. Chas v'shalom. That's why you must have the Mishkan of Truma Tetzaveh that you're trying to replicate and build. But I have to remember that the Rebbeinu Shel Olam dwells in my reality here in this world. This is where I build a Mishkan. This is where I make a dira for Hashem. Or the Medrash says Hashem created the world because He wanted a dira lo yisborach b'tachtoinim, not bel yoinim. Not only bel yoinim, b'tachtoinim. Tachtoinim means in my body, in my house, in my heart, in my life, in my cesspool, so to speak, in my sewer system with all of my issues or with all of our issues. That's where He wants to be. What that means? Sometimes it means to go away. Sometimes it means to move. Sometimes it means to move physically or to move emotionally. Sometimes I have to step out of a certain situation. I can't build a Mishkan here. Because I'm not building a Mishkan, I'm building a churva. I'm not building a Mishkan for Hashem, I'm building a churva. I'm building a place for manipulation, for abuse, for suffering. I have to run away. It's a possible Mishkan, it's not a Mishkan. And even when I'm doing that, I'm building a Mishkan by running away. Sometimes running away from negativity, I'm building a Mishkan. How can this be a Mishkan? It's so not beautiful. This is where Hashem is, in these decisions, in these acts. Sometimes it means staying here and figuring it out and developing it. Sometimes it means putting in the work together and making it into a beautiful Mishkan. And with our children, the same thing. It's to be in a relationship with my child today. What does that mean? For every child, it means something else. For one child, it means we got to talk, got to spend time together, got to have fun, got to go out, learn together, listen together. But to be there, to be fully present. This is my child. This is my Mishkan. This is my Beis HaMikdash. This is where Hashem is going to be. And not imagine that this child is a different type of child living on a mountain. No, this is where the Mishkan is built. Verstehst? A lot of hatzlacha in your decisions, in all of our decisions. Yeah. How it answers the question? What the question was? Yeah, well, it seems so strange. Okay, the universe spans around 176 trillion billion miles. That's 176 trillion billion miles. What is observable to us? The Mishkan is around 150 feet long and 75 feet wide. That's exactly the whole point. That's exactly the whole point. That a human being, through his or her minute and limited deeds and words and thoughts with our physical bodies and our physical lives, we create a home for Hashem in our daily life. A frail and vulnerable human being can create a space in his or her heart for the living presence of truth, for the living presence of Hashem. Right, and this explains, by the way, a very interesting thing. Most of the measurements in the Mishkan go through everything.
and you'll see most of them are half sizes, not whole ones. Right? Take the Aron. Amasayim v'chetzi arkoi. 2.5 amos the length. Amma v'chetzi rachboi. Why not wholesome measurements? Why are most of the measurements in half? But that's the whole essence of the narrative. Our lives are defined by details and by things and by experiences that are usually half. We are fragmented creatures. We don't have completion and perfection. We always do things in half measures. I never get it fully right. I'm flawed. I'm not complete. There's always something left that was undone or unsaid. There are mistakes. And that's the message of the story. Our fragmented lives, our disjointed selves, the diverse details of our mundane life, which come in half sizes, not in full sizes, become a home for the absolute and undefined and eternal truth and reality of Hashem. And this will also explain to you the obsession with all the details and the nuances that seem irrelevant. Is Hashem so concerned with pegs and nails and beams and hooks and sockets and curtains? You know how people plan their home or their apartment or their flat where they're going to live, and they design it and they want it to look perfectly because that's where they're going to spend their days and their nights. And that's what the Rabbi Shalom is saying. This is where I'm going to be. This is where my essence is. And that's why every detail is important. Every hook is important. In your house, if you're attentive and you're conscientious, every hook is important. Every peg is, every doorknob is important. And even though they seem mundane and irrelevant, that's exactly the point. Our lives are defined by details, and most of them seem mundane. Take a person's daily schedule, and we do things in half. So it's the diverse details of our mundane life, those little physical things that can become a home for God. That is exactly the truth. And where is this expressed most? You asked about the kiyar. Where is this expressed most? It's expressed most in the mirrors of the women that were used for the kiyar, which Moshe Rabbeinu initially rejected it. Why did he reject it? Because Moshe Rabbeinu felt, this doesn't belong here. This is not part of the Mishkan. This is the place where HaKadosh Baruch Hu dwells. Why are we using mirrors in the Mishkan? And that Hashem says, Elu chavivin alay min hakoil. This is the most beloved item in the Mishkan, more beloved than anything else. Because that's exactly the whole point of the Mishkan and the Beis HaMikdash. That the Jew takes the physical material, the brute material, the crude material, and metamorphosizes them into an abode for Hashem. I take my heart, I take my life, I take my reality, the way it is, and I have the ability to turn it into the home for Hashem and fulfill the objective of creation. That Nis'ava Kadosh Baruch Hu L'Yisrael B'Tachtonim, he wants a home in the mundane elements of reality. B'Tachtonim, and therefore precisely the mirrors, which as Moshe said, Asuyim L'Yetzahara. It could be used sometimes in not the most ideal way, in not the most noble way. It could sometimes be used in somewhat of a coarse way. And yet I take that is the reality, that Hashem wants to be the place, the space where He is found, where He dwells. Embrace your reality and find God there. Find truth there. Let it become a vehicle for truth. That's the empowering message here. Exactly. And that's represented by the kiyar, that the place where they washed their hands and their feet, actually where holiness came from. They sanctified themselves through the water in the kiyar. That kiyar was built from what? What was it designed from? It was designed from those mirrors. Those mirrors themselves become the source of your cleansing, the source of your purity, the source of your sanctification. That is the gewaltige chiddush. That's the great revolution of the Mishkan. Exactly, that's the point, right? It expresses itself in so many ways, yes. Yeah. Thank you.
This class is brought to you by theyeshiva.net. Please help us continue the classes. Make even a small contribution at www.theyeshiva.net/donate.